and welcome to the April 12, 2022 Planning Board meeting being conducted in the Managers Conference Room at Town Hall in Danvers. We're also, for the first time, doing a hybrid meeting. We have several members, and I'll introduce them, take attendance. They can tell us where they're located, but we have 3 joining by video conference and 2 that are members of the committee that are live in the conference room at Town Hall. For this meeting, the Planning Board is convening via the Teams app is posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join and participate this evening. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Please be aware that other folks may be able to see you, and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Supporting materials that have been provided to the members of this body will be shown during this transmission. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I note otherwise. We now turn into the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, question, or motion. Please hold until your name is called. Also remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor and to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage with each other, please do so through the chair, taking time to identify yourself. For items with public comments, we have established an email address for public comments at danversma.gov. This email address is shown on the online with the streaming of this meeting. Residents may email comments and they will provide read out loud after the staff has confirmed your name and address. All emails must contain the date and the phrase Planning Board meeting in the subject line. Finally, each vote taken this evening will be done on a roll call basis. So let me just do the roll call of attendance of the board members. If you could just say here and how you're participating. Peg Zielinski.
Here, and I'm at home virtual.
Lou George.
Here, and I'm at Town Hall.
Tori Adler.
Here and at Town Hall.
And Jean Hartnett.
Here, I'm virtual.
And I'm John Farmer, I'm the chair, and I'm virtual, and Jim Sears, our other member, is not able to join tonight. So we do have a quorum. So the first item on the agenda is a public hearing, proposed zoning amendment, adaptive reuse, proposed zoning amendment to the town of Danvers zoning bylaws, and an update to section 30, special permits to include adaptive reuse. Overview of the proposed zoning amendment by the planning board and staff. So, Josh, I'll turn it to you.
Very good. So, good evening, everyone. The first item and only item on the agenda tonight is talking about this adaptive reuse zoning update, which potentially will be, or the plan right now is to be at annual town meeting on May 16th. And I'm just going to give a kind of an overview of the zoning update that's being proposed. So why are we doing this? Why are we talking about this? And from the staff and working with some of the preservationists and members of the community, the idea is to add potential options for property owners who are looking to reuse or adapt or to preserve the existing buildings that they are in ownership of. Currently, as of right now, as we speak, the only kind of tool or mechanism to try and save historic buildings in town is through the Preservation Commission and their ability to place a 12-month demolition delay. And we're looking with this zoning update to potentially add, another potential option. Some of the benefits that of this zoning update are allowing historic buildings to be preserved when a new potential use would make it economically feasible. The zoning language would allow flexibility in the potential uses that would be allowed, and also flexibility on the dimensional requirements, which in some cases would prohibit the preservation and the reuse of the building. And also it can be looked at as a tool from an economic development standpoint. When a building, depending on what it was used for in the past, it might make sense from an economic standpoint. If we could use it in a different manner, it might be beneficial in terms of the small businesses and employment and those sorts of economic features. So what is the update? So any building or landmark in town that is more than 100 years old is eligible to apply for a special permit to do a adaptive reuse project. The public hearing process would be with the Zoning Board of Appeals, and that regulatory board would be granting the special permit for the adaptive reuse. The language as it's proposed right now would allow the potential relocation of a building or landmark if it's needed or in that potential scenario, and it encourages property owners to, the main goal is to encourage property owners to preserve, the historic buildings and landmarks in the community. One of the questions or concerns as we've kind of developed the language for this has been, does it supersede other commissions or boards, or what is the kind of permitting process? And it would not supersede or replace the Preservation Commission authority in any manner if a building was being proposed to be demolished that is over 100 years old, and the Preservation Commission has to go through that if they're going to demolish it, or a very significant portion of it. In conversation with the building commissioner downstairs, they deem that it has to go to preservation. That process will still remain. In terms of the questions, in this particular project, like what board or commission will be reviewing it and approving it. The answer from staff standpoint is it just depends on the kind of the scale and scope of the project. There could be scenarios in which it has to go to several of them, and then the order would be determined through staff. And but the point of this, or the goal of this, is not to circumvent any group or commission. It's simply just the main idea or purpose of this is to just allow flexibility in the potential, for if there's a building in town that could be used in a we'd like to save it. It's something that's important to the community from a historical or perspective, or culture, community heritage. It's other than, as we speak right now, as I mentioned earlier, other than the demo delay, we don't have another thing that we can point potential property owners and or developers. So that's what we're trying to the point of this. Some examples that we kind of see from the staff level of pursuing this type of thing, the adaptive reuse. These are just a couple examples on the screen. In terms, it would be like a historic single family house that we've seen in the very recent future. A number of houses being proposed to be demolished and go into preservation. Could the first floor of a single family house in one of the residential zoning districts, could the first floor, even though it's zoned residential right now, could it could an office, a small office, or a lawyer's office, or a real estate office, is it appropriate for them to occupy the first floor and maybe an apartment on the second floor? Also, and then another just kind of potential scenario where this could be applied, or the property owner could apply for is a similar situation, a single family house on one of the busier streets in town. Would it make sense for an office to be on the first floor, or neighborhood retail, or a small cafe? And then just something else. There was as we spoke through some members of the community about just kind of potential concerns about it, that the parking requirements for the potential adaptive reuse would be applied from Section 10 of the zoning bylaw. They would still need to meet parking even if they were reusing the house. The parking requirements would be from the use that's now being proposed. Although it could be the applicant would have the opportunity to request a waiver, but that would be part of the special permitting process with the Zoning Board of Appeals, potentially. So that was just that was a kind of macro level summary. I know this is at the public hearing. This is our first public hearing. That was just a summary from the staff level about the proposed language, and I guess I'll hand it off back to the board for questions, comments, and discussion.
Yeah, so Josh, I'll kick it off just for clarification purposes. Sure. So currently, what's in place didn't we just recently vote to extend the dates of some of the buildings at the last town meeting last town meeting? So what is changing from that article to this one? And is there a specific example you might be able to give us where this tool is helpful in the process? Because I'll be honest, I'm a little confused.
Okay.
What this does to protect the property from a preservation standpoint compared to the tools that are currently in place. Can you just explain that?
Sure. I guess I could just comment on your first kind of question or comment. The preservation bylaw, the date was previously buildings built prior to 1915, and now it's just a rolling date. So as we speak right now, buildings and structures built from prior to 1922 would have to go to the Preservation Commission. So that was it just picked up a couple more years, and then that's a rolling date that as time goes on. So by next year in 2023 it will become 1923, and then it will just keep going. So that's a clarification on that. That was essentially what was modified at town meeting regarding the Preservation Commission bylaw. In terms of your question your question is how would this be changed from what's currently on the books? Is that your question?
Yeah, how does it give it more protection? Can't this property go to the ZBA and get certain changes? Or is this allow a more streamlined process?
All right. So right now as we speak, there is the ability to request I think you might be referring to a use variance.
Yeah.
But those are not allowed in residentially, as we speak right now. Those are not allowed in residential zoned districts. Just for informational purposes or context, in what we see this being applicable to is that the majority of buildings in town that were built prior to 1922 are residential buildings and single-family homes. There's not a significant amount of commercial space, or commercial buildings that were built prior to other than downtown. So, what we see this mostly being applied to is the residential portions of town, most likely.
So wanted to have, as you pointed out, a home office, which is not allowed to be used in a residential setting,
There
could
could
be used with this adaptive reuse.
it could be allowed, and several it's very right now it's very flexible. There's a large amount of potential uses. There are in the zoning bylaw as we speak right now some home occupations that are allowed as we speak right now, but I believe that they are pretty limited and kind of restricted in some manner. We're trying to simply make things a little easier, or from a permitting standpoint, just greater kind of flexibility, for lack of a better term.
Josh, I think David has a.
Start. Yep.
Just wanted to clarify, John, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
But the current demolition delay bylaw, which is not the official title, but we'll just call it that for tonight's purposes, is a general bylaw.
Right.
So it doesn't have any usefulness as far as a zoning tool. So this being in the zoning bylaw would allow it to be used to relax restrictions that otherwise you wouldn't be able to touch through anything to do with the current demo delay bylaw. So two separate books, two separate bylaws. One doesn't trump the other. They kind of have to work in unison. There could be scenarios where you don't go to preservation if you're really not touching anything about the building, but you might apply for adaptive reuse. And there could certainly be situations where you apply for adaptive reuse and you absolutely have to go to preservation because you want to touch the building in some fashion. So they don't trump each other. We're hoping that they kind of work in unison to save more properties than otherwise would be saved. So you're already dealing with a finite number of properties in that they have to be 100 years old, and then you're dealing with the ones after that that people would like to save but likely don't have any other options short of going for a laundry list of variances from the Zoning Board of Appeals, if they can even do that. So this is another tool in the toolbox, hopefully.
That's helpful, David.
Sure.
So is there any proposed language to Article 38 yet? Or is that something that we'll see at a future meeting that's actually going to be the language?
Yep. I believe that I sent the language out to the group, and our
Share screen.
actually, let me try and share that.
I have it open if you want me to.
Oh, okay. Would you be
I
able
think
to?
you have to stop sharing and then I
It's
can.
39 now.
Stop sharing.
It's 30, okay.
John, one moment.
It was 38, now it's 39. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
All right. So it's pretty short as far as zoning amendments go. It's just a purpose statement, and then we go into eligibility. So the general purpose, I think, in summation, really, is to encourage preservation through flexible development options. From going from 1 to 4, if you summarize all of those. The eligibility criteria really has to deal with, it's any building or landmark, which is how the current demolition of historically significant buildings bylaw reads. So rather than try to be the experts on that, we're just trying to let the demolition delay bylaw speak for itself, take their language and say if you get triggered for preservation through demolition, you can also apply for this special permit. That's the eligibility criteria right there. So that way in the future, if the Preservation Commission itself determines that there's triggers they need to change or something's not working or whatever it may be, they can change their triggers through their historical expertise, and no one will have to go back to the zoning bylaw to then do all the updates to the eligibility criteria. It'll be more streamlined going forward. At least that's the idea. I think as Josh laid out, it's a letter C there. Talks about, kind of scroll down. Talks about the special permit. It's, as Josh pointed out, through the Zoning Board of Appeals. And it really allows modifications to the zoning bylaws, tables 1, 2, and 3. Table 1 is the table of uses. Table 2 is the dimensional table for residential uses. And table 3 is the dimensional table for commercial and industrial uses. So we don't know where these buildings will be, what zone they'll fall into, and what use they want to do. So we're using both of the dimensional tables because it might be one or the other. It might be a mix of many on one site. You know, we can't predict that. So it's all the tables all in. As with any special permit, there are required findings. So in letter D, as I scroll down. The findings are pretty broad, but there's quite a few of them, and they mostly have to do with the historic nature of the building and the structure. I think some key ones are the zoning board thinking with the demolition hat, in that, you know, failure to grant the special permit is very likely to result in an inappropriate use of the structure or demolition. We don't expect them to be historical experts. I think the hope is that the Preservation Commission will be able to, you know, discuss the project, provide some sort of guidance. It's not uncommon for that to happen nowadays. We usually get a memo from the archivist, Richard Trask, on the historic nature of the building, so that can be provided as well. Any questions from anyone so far?
No, this is helpful.
Okay. And then the last thing of the whole bylaw is letter E. It's a relocation of the buildings or landmarks. I honestly don't think that this will get used all that often. It would be
Rare.
physically difficult to pull off. However, it is a good option to have on the table if somebody wanted to relocate a historic structure and happen to have a place where they would relocate it to. So it's an option out there. They'd be able to modify some of the zoning requirements for, I'll call it the receiving lot, so the lot that would be housing the structure in the future. And that way it could be saved and preserved in its own location, you know, in perpetuity. Again, there'd be a lot of moving parts to that, but this is at least an option. So that's on the table as well. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. There's nothing left in the bylaw. That's the end. Happy to take any questions or comments, or make comments as we go. We also have, I think we were thinking maybe we might have another night to take a crack at this as well. So
Just for information.
Okay, well, that makes sense. All right, so, Peg, why don't we start with you, if you don't mind, if you have
Nope.
questions.
I don't mind. So the way I'm seeing this is really just something that's a parallel bylaw to the demolition bylaw. It doesn't affect preservation. If you wanted to do something to your historic house within the districts or preservation, this doesn't help in any way. This is just involving reuse, relocation, and that's about it. You know, what you can do on the first floor. I don't have any problem with this. I don't think I have any problem with this. I'm not on any preservation committees or anything, but I think that we have some pretty strict preservation committees in town, and I think that this would be good to go hand in hand with their regulations. So right now, I don't see anything wrong with this. I can see a number of projects with it, but can't see anything wrong with it.
So Lou, I know you've wore two hats a little bit, so you want to kind of give your feedback and comments?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, and this is definitely, I think, has been mentioned by staff. I think this definitely gives a additional tool in the toolbox. Being, you know, because I'm one of the members of the Preservation Commission, and with my, you know, as a planning board member hat on the Preservation Commission, and we've definitely seen, if you've even looked at the agendas lately, we've seen a number of properties that have come up for demolition, and we certainly anticipate doing so in the future. And although, you know, it's true that the demolition delay bylaw has been revised over the years, that, you know, that the number now it's a 1 year demolition delay. Now it's a rolling period of time as well, so it's 100-year rolling as opposed to being stopped in 1915, which it was before. But we're still, it always seems though like we're a little bit, you know, it's very reactive being on Preservation Commission, because in essence if there is a finding of historical significance and that the building is worthy of preserving, you have that 1 year clock that starts. And then you're sort of working behind, almost a little behind the 8 ball in terms of trying to figure out some way to preserve the building within that 1 year period as the clock is ticking. I think here this does provide a more of a sort of a more proactive measure in terms that it gives another option for both for homeowners as well as for potentially for developers to adaptively reuse a building, shy of tearing it down. And I think as Peg mentioned too, I mean it would be parallel to the demolition bylaw. So for example, if the adaptive reuse did involve, let's say, taking down a wall or doing some sort of work, some change to the structure of the building, it would still need to go before preservation. But I think at least it provides something that that an applicant can certainly look to. Instead of looking at the first instance demolition and working backwards, you're looking at adaptive reuse and sort of moving forwards. And I know that staff even provided some samples of what of properties that could be adaptively reused. You could see certainly offices, something going to an office or a restaurant. One area that that I'm glad that there's some good language in here as well with respect to the special permit, the special permit requirements as well, that relates to the historic features of the building or landmark will be preserved for the duration of the special permit, for example. That the proposed renovation, repair, adaptive reuse, or relocation preserves to the maximum extent feasible the historical features. I think that's important. And then of course we want to be concerned too about the surrounding, the abutters and the surrounding neighborhood as well. And so I think that it's important is that there is a criterion that it not generate negative impact to the surrounding area, or that any negative impacts generated may be feasibly mitigated. So I think that there is some good, there is some good language in there related to sort of the special permit piece of things. So sort of like in sum, I mean, I did have the chance to talk to staff about this in advance about this too, and any questions that I had, but I think that and we do have some members of the public here today too, so I'm interested in seeing what they have to say about it as well. But I believe that this is definitely a valuable, and I think promises to be a valuable tool for not just for adaptive reuse, but for preservation of the town. So I'm in favor of it.
That was good feedback, thanks. Tori?
Well, I like the idea of adaptive reuse in principle, and I can think of a lot of very good uses, but I'd like to get into a little more detail about exactly what this does to the existing authorities of the ZBA and the Preservation Commission. As far as dimensional variances, does this grant ZBA any new powers that they don't already have to control setbacks, height, that kind of thing?
John, would you like me to answer there?
Yeah, go ahead, David,
Sure.
please.
Currently, the zoning board, I think, there's a train coming through.
Sorry.
That's okay. Currently, the ZBA can grant dimensional variances in any zone for any project that they want. So if it was going closer to a side yard setback or something, they can grant that. Anything really in those dimensional tables. So it doesn't broaden what they can grant. The only thing it really does is it tries to streamline the permitting into one special permit. So you'd be saying like, the whole point is I want to save this historic structure rather than apply for, potentially numerous variances. Depending on the scenario, you'd be just going for that special permit.
So, could ZBA today approve a use outside of the existing zoning?
They can.
Okay.
They can. They get requests for that.
So
Yes, they do use variances right now. That was your question.
So the
But not
difference.
residential.
That's the one. The difference. In residential zones currently, they used to be able to do that. They can no longer do that. I think
Okay,
that was,
so this would grant them a new power to change use in a residential zone.
only for buildings or structures that meet the criteria for demo delay. But yes. Yeah.
Which means that when Preservation Commission designates a historical significance, in order to trigger that 12-month delay, they are also designating that this is a property that's eligible for this potential change of use through the ZBA.
Yes.
What is the order?
So one concern I have is that this puts the Preservation Commission in a position where granting that status is potentially opening a door that they may or may not want to open. Let's say you have a historic house in a neighborhood which would be totally inappropriate for commercial development, but you'd hate to see a beautiful piece of architecture torn down. You couldn't put the 12-month delay on it without also certifying it as appropriate for this special permit granted by the ZBA. Is that right?
I think I hear what you were saying. I think the difference is you'd be able to go to the zoning board with this without going to the Preservation Commission. It really depends, I think, as Josh was saying before, what you're trying to permit and what you're trying to do. You may want to go to preservation first, but you could just go to the zoning board as long as it meets the criteria in the demo delay bylaw. So if the
Okay.
Preservation Commission says this is historically significant, it doesn't like automatically trigger, well, now I go to the ZBA.
So does that mean that the ZBA can then make a determination of historical significance akin to what the Preservation Commission would do?
No, they can't put a demolition delay on anything. They're not making the structure historically significant.
But they could approve it as historically significant for the purpose of this special permit.
It's just 100 years.
It's basically, if you want to think about it this way, if you're older than 100 years, the structure or landmark, you could apply to the ZBA.
So that concerns me because we have a lot of buildings that are older than 100 years.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are in places where I don't think people would appreciate a variance outside of the residential zone.
Which is why it's a special. I'm just for information purposes. Which is why it's a special permit. So even when we went to the ZBA, it would require 4 out of the 5. It would kind of like our board. It would require 4 out of the 5 members to be in favor of it.
But
So-
it's still extending the power of what they're able to do. So
Sure.
given that scenario, you've got, say, a house in a neighborhood and it's approved for a special permit for commercial reuse, does it then need site plan review? Or would that only be triggered if they're doing construction? Or would that be like a change of use in a commercial zone?
It kind of all depends. It could be any of those. I think Josh was highlighting before. You may end up stopping at Conservation Commission, Planning Board, Zoning Board, Preservation Commission, and the selectmen for use of the right of way or something like that. So it really all depends. It's project specific. So I think one of the things we were trying to be cognizant of working with members of the Preservation Commission was you still need to meet all the parking requirements and anything else that you would need to apply for in the zoning you still need to do. So it's not just like go to the ZBA, like I'm good to go. You'd still need to be tied to those restrictions. So if you could meet them on site as is, you may not need to go for site plan review because you're not really doing anything to the structure necessarily.
So potentially you've got a scenario where you could have a change of use in a residential neighborhood approved solely by the ZBA with no oversight by any other board.
Yes. Depending on the scale and scope and
As long as the structure is totally.
I'm uncomfortable with that.
sure.
That's all I've got at this point. Thanks.
That's good feedback. Jean?
Hi, I think, from the first discussions we've had, I think I'm okay with it. I always would like to see a building preserved and not torn down. But I would like to have some more discussions if time allows.
Time allowed. We're all here.
Yeah, I mean, do we have time for another
Yep. Yeah.
week or?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. We have we were planning on. We were just opening tonight, and then we were definitely planning on having another discussion at our next meeting. We just it's hard to tell from our permitting process how many items we're going to have, so we try to keep this one open, just for this discussion.
Okay.
So Josh, just to pick up on Tori's point, I mean, there's certain residential areas that would be potentially logical that are close to the downtown. But I can understand the concern of encroachment, but if you had you just try to pick a neighborhood, that's not in the historic district, outside of the historic district, but an older home
Right.
that's in your classic subdivision.
Right. Exactly. Right. Yep.
And have that potentially turned into a restaurant.
Right. So, and that's
That's not,
if you wanted to.
is that the
Yes.
spirit of what we're trying to accomplish? I understand the older homes that might be close to a
Right.
commercial district.
Right. I don't think that's the intent. That scenario, a single family house in a subdivision and that's zoned R3 to have the intent I don't think is to have like a 50-seat restaurant on a cul-de-sac. That's not what I think we're trying to do.
I know.
And that would obviously, as kind of Lou pointed out, there are a number of findings that the ZBA would have to be in agreement with.
I mean, I think
So
additionally, it's a completely discretionary permit, so the zoning board could just say no. But the other part is, I think the market will weigh that out quite a bit. So you're going to have older structures on a busy street, maybe in a commercial corridor, that might request a commercial use. We kind of envision, if anything, if it's a neighborhood type of use, that it would be a professional office, similar to things that we have now closer to downtown or R1, like a dentist office, an attorney shop, a realty office. It doesn't mean somebody can't ask. You can ask, for whatever you want. But I just think market factors would probably dictate that the restaurant wouldn't be successful
yep.
in an R3 cul-de-sac.
Not to cut David off. Something I just thought of, John, with your comment, and just thinking about, obviously kind of trying to prepare for this. We were trying to just internally talk through scenarios. And one thing in your kind of scenario that you brought up that came to mind was that kind of cul-de-sac subdivision that I think we all have in our minds. And what would someone propose to do something like a restaurant, at the end of a cul-de-sac? Is that would never probably come to fruition, or they wouldn't be eligible because that neighborhood is the age organically is going to be, newer than 1922, right? So that kind of scenario is probably never likely to happen because the house has to be built in 1922 or before. So I think that scenario would probably not really.
So I thought it had to be 100 years old or older.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Right.
So is it fair to say, and Lou, and maybe you can help us with this,
Sure.
but if you just look at the town, the way it's set up,
Yep.
those streets closest, off of High Street and Conan Street, some of those old structures, is that what we're trying to protect?
Yeah. And-
Or can you maybe give us a couple examples of where this would have played nicely into the toolbox?
Well,
That's train
Do
station.
you have an example?
Yeah.
Lou, by any chance?
no, I think we can. I mean,
I got a scenario that, may I?
member of the public.
Just maybe say your name and say your name or
Okay,
or name
thank
or
you.
address or.
Jim Simon, 50 Pine Street. I am a town meeting member. I think a good scenario where this would come in, I have no idea who owns the property, but let's just take a hypothetical. The old inn up there on the corner of Center Street and Hobart. That house there, and I don't think anybody's living in there, hasn't been for a long time. Now, let's say I own that property. I have not been able to maintain and upkeep it. I don't have the money. However, if I could put real estate office space in there or something like that, where the barn has fallen down, plenty of parking back there. So now I have the horses and the wherewithal to fix that building up, maintain it, make it look like it still did, and actually get some income from it. I think, is that a good scenario for the intent of this? That's how I'm interpreting it.
Yeah.
Sounds appropriate.
Yeah, John, may I add that?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I think that could certainly be, that's a little bit of a different one too, because that's also within the historic district.
Oh, okay,
So
let's say it
because-
wasn't in the historic district.
But assuming it wasn't in the historic
Right.
district, that could be,
Okay.
you know, where I grew up, for example, John, I grew up on Water Street. I grew up on Water Street, right near the corner of Endicott and Water Street, in a house that was built in 1793. And so that could be, for example, something that is, you know, that could be, you know, could be adaptively reused. I mean, we've certainly had buildings that are coming up before the Preservation Commission as well, that are, you know, that are on major, that are in residential districts, in which demolition permits have been pulled. So Maple Street, for example, as well as on Summer Street. So so all of these areas could be, you know, they're on major drags, and so that could be something which could be used, adaptively reused for office area or something of that, you know, something like that. Another thought, though, with respect to the question about a, you know, an old house sitting in the middle of a subdivision. And I know that we do have some of those. In fact, I think off of Donegal, I think there's a very old home from the 1600s that's in sort of smack in the middle of a subdivision area. I mean, I think a protection of that is that you would still have to follow you would still need to meet the parking requirements. So I think that could, you know, rule out really any sort of the more intensive uses in terms of like restaurant uses. But I think that it could certainly go beyond, you know, because as I said, you know, where I grew up on Water Street, there are a lot of older homes on High Street, Water Street, Endicott, you know, outside of what we consider a historic district, that could potentially, you know, could benefit from this.
That's helpful. These are examples that help, especially for the people who are listening in, right? And in trying to also address a potential concern that, you know, that Tori raised, which was a good one. You know, where could it end, right? I mean, the logical ones make sense, but it's the outliers.
And John, what regulations do we put in to prevent that from happening? I'm listening to this with great interest. I worked for an economic council for many years. And in 1980, my first outside job was looking at the size of downtown Danvers, the commercial area, and the effect that the encroachment on the side streets had on filling the buildings in the downtown area, the encroachment, and how Danvers could shrink that commercial area so that they would decrease the supply and therefore increase the demand. And so I'm finding this very interesting because I'm thinking of the side streets that do have, you know, lawyers' offices, and I can only think of a lawyer's office right now. But that was one very long discussion 42 years ago. And now we're back to saying, how can we preserve some of those older, beautiful houses? And I do think that Tori's comments really made me think. I do think that I do like this tool in the toolbox, but I am very concerned with it going further than it should. And us, again, keeping our zones where we should keep our zones. Right now, the downtown's, I don't know how many empty businesses we have, but we have quite a few. So I'd like to see if there's some way we can put something in there that can not limit, well, I don't want to say limit, but yeah, I guess I do want to say limit the impact on certain neighborhoods, so that we don't again have that oversupply of lots of places where people can go and they're not going into the commercial areas. My comments.
Thank you. Josh, why don't we open it up to the public?
Yeah, I was just gonna mention that, John.
John, can I say something brief?
Yeah, go right
I
ahead.
just want to point out that we're talking about 1922 right now, but
Yes.
if this becomes bylaw, then 10 years and 20 years and 30 years, we're starting to talk about much newer structures
Mhm.
that we might not today recognize as historically significant that are potentially affected, that's all.
Woodville,
I'm not sure if you, Dan, you had something to say? Or?
Sure, yeah.
And then Kathy?
Go ahead, Dan.
Sorry, I'm sitting behind you guys. I had a couple things regarding the
Okay, first-
language.
Yeah, sorry, just name and address, or name.
Dan Gagnon, Burley Farm Road, I'm also in the historic district. In terms of the language of the bylaw matching up with what its intent seems to be, and I think that we have a couple things that I don't think what's written is how it's interpreted or meant. With the first one being the eligible buildings. It says, under eligibility criteria, any building or landmark that meets the definition of historically significant building or landmark found in the demolition delay bylaw. And that definition is any building within the town that's in whole or in part 100 years older and has been determined by the commission to be significant. So this seems to only apply to things the Preservation Commission has voted on. That didn't sound like it was intended that way, but
Okay.
I think it
I
seems
read it
to
the
be.
same way, and I think that needs clarification.
Yeah, I kind of like that better.
I agree.
But
Sorry, which one do you like better? I'm sorry.
I like the idea that the Preservation Commission has to vote first. I think it limits the pool, and it definitely means it's a like priority house structure, whichever, and that could kind of maybe eliminate some unintended consequences, not like totally, maybe a little bit. And I had another kind of a question related to that, involving the historic district. So when this references buildings in the demolition delay and that definition, demolition delay bylaw doesn't apply to the historic districts. So does this not apply to buildings in the historic district? Because that would be my conclusion. And it sounded like from the slides that it was assumed it did apply to the historic district.
Sorry, run that by me one more time.
So it references chapter, the demolition delay.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
This doesn't
I see what
apply
you're
to the
saying.
historic district,
Sure,
or at least it hasn't been interpreted
sure,
that way previously.
sure.
I don't, with the historic district having such a high level of control, you can't hit a nail on the head without the historic district letting you do it, it seems. I wouldn't actually be worried about including the historic district buildings, because I think that's such a really tight level of control.
Yeah.
But I just think this doesn't actually include them. And that way with, Mr. Simon's example of like the inn, the Ingersoll House at the corner there, I can think in the historic district of low use or low impact uses relating to like tourism. If you think of like historic houses in Salem that are, oh, it's a small little bed and breakfast with only, 2 cars there at night or something like that, that could be a low impact use, and actually in the historic district could be kind of appropriate, depending on the building or depending on the lot there.
Right. So you would be in favor or support of potentially doing an adaptive reuse potentially in HD, in that geographic area? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I would actually be more comfortable with that, because the historic district, you couldn't pave a parking lot without them letting you. So it's a very high level of control. So I think the unintended consequences are actually kind of the most minimized there. And they also, if the zoning board approves somebody in the historic district to vary the setbacks, historic district would have to approve the varied setbacks in theory. They at least have the option of denying them, even if the ZBA had already said yes. So that's a real, control. So those are the two things I had. I do like the idea that the Preservation Commission has to vote first, because I think it shrinks the pool.
One comment I think that we potentially would view is in shrinking the pool is that there also might not be good to shrink the pool also if the goal is to if we want people to you know, to try, you know, to apply. In shrinking the pool, then, I guess the idea, I think, that we were thinking, if, not that we're trying to avoid preservation anyway, but if every project had to go to preservation first, then it might, you know, it might deter some people from potentially doing this when, if the goal, the macro level goal, is to ultimately save the building. If we're not trying to, you know, like make it easy or, you know, like on people. But if some property owners and or developers, if you have to go to 3 or 4 different boards and commissions to do stuff, there, sometimes it, and from organically deters them from doing what you ultimately want them to do, if that makes, I don't know if I'm articulating that very well.
Sort of. I would say that it could give the Preservation Commission more work, more applications.
Mhm.
But if the point's to save a historic building, basically I would say that I'm only concerned about the ones that go to the Preservation Commission because those are the only ones gonna be demolished. If they're not demolishing it, it's not a historic preservation motive to change something.
That's a good point.
It's an excellent point.
Mhm.
Interesting point.
That was what I had, thank you.
John, Lou had a question or comment.
Um, Yeah, I had a question. I guess I had a question for staff, and this could be Josh or David in terms of dealing with, you know, you obviously have dealt with homeowners, developers, and such. What is your, you know, in terms of, you know, have you had situations where developers have been, you know, where they've wanted to say let's do an adaptive reuse, but they've sort of been thwarted, and instead they go the demolition route.
Yeah,
I'm just kind of wondering what,
Yeah.
in terms of the
Right, the data's
looking at sort of
real life scenarios.
incentives, that sort of thing.
yeah, I mean, I think right now there's really not many other options for them to both keep the building and do the project. You know, if you had a building that wanted to do an addition off the back or something like that, they may or may not be able to do that without this bylaw. I mean, I think, you know, I'm staff, so I can just say it. 42 Summer Street right now, which is up for on the docket for demolition, is something that could possibly be saved through a bylaw similar to this. Doesn't mean it would, doesn't mean the property owner wants to do that, but they could add that to, say, the existing use nearby, or use it for a meeting location for staff or something like that, if approached. But right now, that's a residential 2 zone, and the only option for them is to use it as a single family home. They don't have, there's nothing else they can really do. Well, there are some other uses, but for the most part, what you can do is single family home. But I think that building, it's first period, if I'm not
quite old.
mistaken. Yeah.
Yeah. 1725, I think.
But there are similar situations like that where we do have people approach us, you know, saying, this is a nice structure, what can I do? And generally the answer is, well, not a heck of a lot. Sometimes they get rehabbed and sold as single families. It does have a lot to do also with the state of the structure. Sometimes they're not so bad, people will rehab it and just, you know, either flip it or continue to inhabit it. But sometimes if they're in less than desirable condition, it's going to take significant money to bring it up to speed. I think similar to the
Yeah.
example you were saying. It can be hard to justify the cost, I think, for either a homeowner or a potential homeowner. But
I think Mr. Duggan wanted to weigh in.
Yes, if I may. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matthew Duggins, 41 Chase. I have 3 things that I'd like to mention. The first, I had a question on this, on letter D, Delta. There's a SPGA.
Yes.
What
That's Special Permit Granting Authority. In this situation, it would be the Zoning Board of Appeals.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Josh, for that.
Yeah, for sure.
And then the second thing is just to, you know, Mr. George, Mr. Adler, and Mr. Gagnon, they're pulling back the curtains and talking about kind of like, for me, what's the worst case scenario? So we have one of our favorite attorneys that we often see, and when I look at these zoning changes, I always try to think about what kind of loophole is there, or what's the worst thing that could happen? Because if we don't think about it, someone else will, and that's always the downside when we try to do something that's a positive. There's always somebody that, you know, tries to kind of twist it and see that how they can kind of leverage that. So, for example, you mentioned earlier about Conant Street. So Conant Street in the Back Bay, we have, I think it's number 36 Conant, which is that medical building, the brick building. So that's the kind of change that I would envision. You talk about restaurants, but imagine another large house on that street. So you know, the McKay Funeral Home, that was torn down. That type of structure could easily become like a medical, shared use medical building where you could have, you know, doctors or dentists or whatever. But the impact would be for the parking. So you have a residential neighborhood, and now you have a lot of vehicle traffic coming and going all day long, and the quality of life impact that has on the neighborhood. So the Back Bay, we're trying to claw back. There's been not an invasion, but kind of a creeping of commercial use into the residential neighborhood. So that's something that should be a concern. And I don't know if the ZBA is really, that seems like the last hurdle. And I'm not really comfortable, you know, relying on the ZBA. With all due respect to them, I know it's a difficult position that they have, but I think maybe this needs to be flushed out a little bit more. And then just the one last thing is administrative. So your agenda for this evening, it says that it's a public meeting at the senior center, and this topic that we're discussing is a public hearing, and yet I don't see anyone at the senior center from what I can see. I'm actually at home now, but is that just an oversight, or how did that happen?
That's a good point. So this meeting got changed at the last minute. So to the town manager's conference room. This is our first meeting that's been a hybrid model, but we did have to pivot, Josh, right? Because of was the senior center being used?
Yes, unfortunately, yes. Yes.
So.
Okay.
I am concerned that but I am concerned, you raise a good point, that the public get proper notice here.
There are members of the public here present, just for informational purposes. We also did indicate, we also put up signage at the senior center indicating to the public, anyone who is interested in participating in this meeting, that the meeting was being held here. So,
okay, that's fine.
Yep.
If you put a sign up, I think that works.
Yep.
And then just to commend the people. I know it's been more than 2 years since you guys. So to see Lou and Tori there in person. So hopefully at some point all of you will be in the same room together, and maybe we'll have a little party or something. So that's all I have. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah,
one thing, I'm sorry for the bell ringing. I keep muting my voice thing, but I do it after the bell rings, when I hear the bell ring. Shouldn't we have read a public hearing notice at the beginning of the,
It was. You didn't hear it? I did read that in.
I'm sorry, I guess I missed it.
Okay. It's the only, I did say it was a public hearing for the proposed zoning amendment.
Okay. Just checking.
Yep, thanks. Anyone else, Josh?
Yeah.
I can't see the whole conference room, so.
Yeah, yep, I will try and assist you, yep, there is at least one more person from the public who would wish to speak, I will grant the floor to Kathy Simon, or if you could say your name and address.
Sure. Hi, I'm Kathy Simon, Precinct 7 Town Meeting member and a former Preservation Commission member. And I only say that because I have experience with our town and developers who tend to target older homes for demolition. And that's been the experience because older homes are often targeted because they sit on larger lots. So my concern is that will this provision generate a new hunger for our older homes, so that and maybe not so much as for the reuse part of it, but yes, for the reuse part of it, but also for the additions that they will now want to put on the back, and will now have a lot of beautiful older homes with big hunks of house, boxes of houses on the back. Does this provision recognize density in any way? And I don't know enough about it, it's over my pay grade, but I am concerned about it, which made me come here to learn more about it. And I hope you're all cognizant of what we in preservation are concerned about.
Good question.
Thank you.
Staff, someone want to try to address that? I mean, I understand the concern, right? We've had some pretty large parcels, older homes, and so
Yeah.
feedback. David or Josh, you want to give some feedback to that?
Sure. There's no provisions in here to limit what can be done. I mean, I think it was drafted or designed, modeled on other communities with the intent of saving the structure. If that means something is going to be added to it in order to save it, perhaps that's the only. If the other option is drive a bulldozer through the front of it, I mean, it could be saved. I mean, you have to weigh your options. It's whatever the community wants. If we're trying to save the structure or trying to keep it frozen in time permanently.
So as it's written, John and everyone in the room, everyone in the meeting, the density or those types of density and dimensional requests would be discussed during the Zoning Board of Appeals public hearing process. As David alluded to, right now there's not limits or maximums on those things. I think how we kind of viewed this was we were trying to keep this as we speak as flexible and open as possible, with that main goal, or the main goal of saving the building, and that was one. We kind of viewed it as that was when we start putting restrictions on restriction on the things, like I kind of mentioned earlier, it's gonna over the more restrictions you add and asterisks, it's going to be less appealing if we want to kind of encourage people to, is this an option? When the more asterisks and restrictions you put on it, it won't be utilized.
You're right. I mean, that's always the challenge, right? Trying to find the right balance here.
That makes sense.
And unfortunately, looking at the downside scenario is not a bad way of looking at some of this stuff, right? I don't disagree with Mr. Duggan, right? I mean, it's the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish. Sometimes you don't get what you want out of it, and it's hard without seeing live examples, right? I do like the tool. I do like some screening that goes on, but I don't know all the 100+ year buildings that want to be preserved that the Preservation Commission doesn't seem it. It's the same way. I kind of like the fact that you get the green light to go forward, but I understand that complexity too. So I'm glad we're having this conversation because I do think we need more feedback and and maybe have some other examples at the next open, public meeting, that we can say, here's an example of where we lost a building that we would have preferred to have kept. But because we didn't have this tool, it went away. Do we have many of those?
Oh, could I comment?
Unfortunately, the planning staff's the ones that's gonna see that, right?
I
Because
guess
they come in and they talk to you guys and they say, hey, can we get this accomplished? And no, you can't, and then they go off into a different direction. Unless it comes forward on a board, it's hard to say, is this in the best interest of the community and the property?
I think we have a
Yeah,
public comment,
great.
John, and then Lou also wanted to say something.
Okay.
I guess this is Kathy Simon again from Precinct 7. Just on Thursday, the Preservation Commission is meeting, and there are
Oh, right.
4 or 5.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Four properties, for which I could just rattle off the addresses, that you could then take a look at and see yourself how this would play out or it wouldn't play out, you know. I checked out all the homes and I was shocked to see what is coming before preservation right now for demolition. You know, these aren't rack and ruin homes on High Street and Pickering Street, you know, and Tibbetts Avenue, maybe Tibbetts, you can have
Right.
Tibbetts. But as far as others go, it's a little scary. I think you could take the 3 that you're gonna see on Thursday night at Preservation and have a great discussion about those 3 examples.
That's good feedback.
Lou, do you have a quick comment?
I mean, I guess it's just one, you know, in terms of examples, and I think, you know, I think Kathy raised a good point in terms of what is coming up at preservation is an example of what we've seen. You know, particularly when you see these large, you know, buildings in residential neighborhoods was mentioned, even, you know, 42 Summer Street, which is is going before Preservation Commission on sort of the step 2 of the, you know, the commission has already made a finding that it's historically significant, and now there's going to be a public hearing as terms of whether it's worthy of preserving, and the 1-year demolition bylaw would go into effect. The other properties have not yet gone through that initial review yet, and so that's going to be at the meeting on Thursday for the other buildings. I think one is, I think it's 367 if I got it straight, Maple Street. So just in terms of one question I have, I guess, is in terms of, and I'm not sure, and understanding the point that was raised about and Gagnon pointed out the point, I think Tori mentioned it as well, about the sort of the criterion in terms of whether it needs to, you know, whether you need to go to Preservation Commission first. I guess one sort of logistical question I have too is that to go to Preservation Commission, you have to, you know, typically you pull a demo permit.
You have to pull a permit, yeah.
So is there a way that, and I'm just trying to think, is there a way that the eligibility criteria can be, you know, can be finessed in such a way that either it's, you know, it sort of follows, you know, because I understand the way it's worded in terms of it seems like it requires a finding by Preservation Commission. I'm not sure if other communities do, for example, if there are any sort of like consultations by the Preservation Commission or by another, you know, I know Richard Trask as town archivist does consultations to the Preservation Commission. Is there any way that there can at least be, you know, some consultations that take place that sort of inform the eligibility criteria, short of pulling a demolition permit and going before Preservation Commission in that formal demo permit scenario? That is a question. Sorry, I was very lengthy.
John, do you want me to take that?
Yeah, go right ahead.
So, yeah, I think that's certainly a possibility. I guess I'd say, just to bear in mind for articles in general for town meeting, we generally have to present the scope to be as broad as possible, then kind of hone in where we want to go. So anything's on the table. It can be tweaked, it can be modified. You know, if it's not ready right now, it's not ready. But to Lou's point, it could be a consultation to either the town archivist ahead of time. It could be an informal meeting with the Preservation Commission. The only, I guess, the way we were trying to draft it with just our caps on is like, what would you do? Like if you're just a random person walking into town hall trying to get this accomplished. To kick off the Preservation Commission, you do have to put together a demolition permit, and I think now we're requiring if you're going to demo, it's a demo plan, because you want to know where the electricity is going to be shut off, how the water and gas are going to be turned off, and presented to the building commissioner. Then the building commissioner deems it whether or not they go to Preservation Commission based on what they're trying to do. That's okay. I think it was just that was a lot of upfront work that you know that you don't want to do. You're actually trying to save it. So it could be any type of other consultation that we want to do. I've seen communities recommend them to the Historic District Commission, even though the District Commission doesn't have jurisdiction over the properties. I've seen that. I thought that was a little odd, but so it's kind of, we can pick and choose whatever we'd like in terms of prior criteria. But looks like Dan Gagnon in the audience has a comment, I think, either to my comment or something else.
Yep, Dan Gagnon again. Well, what you were saying, David, and Lou, your question, it is a good point that potentially already having them apply for a building permit might not seem the most appropriate. If there was some other very similar seeming path of you either need to be determined historically significant, like, or endorsed by the Preservation Commission as historically significant, like a second track with like the same criteria to be historically significant, like not watering down we're only looking at like the priority buildings. But if that could be done without literally pulling the demolition permit or figuring out where you turn off the electricity, and right, that doesn't for this seem to make sense. But basically like parallel track, same criteria, but just found historically significant for the purposes of this bylaw. I think that could be more straightforward, as long as the criteria is the same as in the demolition delay, the important either architecturally, historically, culturally, like that same wording.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah?
John, there's another comment from the public.
Yep, go right ahead, yep.
Sorry. It just triggered,
Just your name again.
oh, sorry, Kathy Simon, former Preservation Commission member, and only because it triggered for me, the pattern that we were also seeing, wherein developers or homeowners would buy a house and put in for a demo permit, even though they didn't necessarily have the intention to demolish it. They wanted to start the clock ticking. And so this was a maneuver, of course, that we've seen, and you will see in this exercise as well. So I just wanted to bring that up, just so that you can, just to add that when we create a ruling, there will always be a means for which people will monopolize it or work around it. Yeah.
Okay, any other comments?
John, can I say something?
Yep, go right ahead, Tori.
I don't want anyone to think I'm against preserving old houses. I think our architecture is a valuable resource in the town, and I fully support creating a tool to help in appropriate situations preserving these properties. But I feel like streamlining is an inappropriate goal in this situation when we're talking about potentially changing zoning in residential areas. And I don't really see a problem with what Mr. Gagnon suggested, that the Preservation Commission be the one, as it seems to suggest in this language, which could be nailed down a little more, that the Preservation Commission be the ones to determine historical significance, so that we're not just talking about the age of the structure, which will someday encompass subdivisions built in the 70s, and that we might also consider that if a commercial property was undergoing a change of use to a previously approved site plan, planning board has some jurisdiction there. And if we're talking about potentially putting a business in the middle of a residential neighborhood in a historic building, I think having more involvement from different boards is better than streamlining in favor of development.
Other comments? So obviously, we're gonna continue this conversation to the next meeting, but if we're gonna try to hit the timeline for the town meeting, what is the timeline, David, in terms of planning board endorsement or not, to meet the warrant schedule?
Yep, so we're currently, at the bylaw is on the warrant as it is. The select board have viewed it and done their thing with it. The planning board meeting, this will be on the next planning board meeting. We also would need to take this to the finance committee, which it's slated to do last week of April. So we're ready to hit those targets, you know, and it's up to the board when we get there if how we want to proceed, or you know, if we want to proceed. So I think we're on track. We can hit all the dates that would need to be hit. I think we'll wait to see when we get there what happens going to town meeting.
Right, so as the next step, obviously, we'll have another meeting.
Yep.
More folks from the public to weigh in. Are we gonna massage the language, or we're just waiting for additional feedback for that particular meeting? Because, you know, the last time around, clearly, what the language reads is the important part
Yep.
for the folks who are voting in the town meeting.
I think what I'm hearing is my takeaway homework is to massage the language based on what was said tonight. We'll give it a whirl.
Yeah.
You may end up with a few options in the eligibility criteria section, based on what was said tonight. I think that would be that seems to be the most logical approach to go forward.
That makes sense.
And we'd be happy to send around, you know, any reworked, modified language, obviously sooner rather than not the day of the meeting. You know, if we'd like to send it out to everyone, you know, with a decent amount of time to review. So.
Just a quick,
There was a comment. Lou had a comment, John.
Lou.
just sort of tying in with you to said your question in terms of the timeline. So you know, so assuming that there's some, you know, that some of the language here is massaged, and I do agree. I think in terms of some of the eligibility criteria and such, I think on hearing comments and all, I think it makes sense to do some revisions there. I guess how does that work in terms of once we're going to FinCom? We're still okay. Timing is still.
Yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Ultimately, according to Mass General Law, the planning board's report to town meeting is the recommendation that they'll be looking at. As in Danvers, we do that as well. We've done that the last few years. So the planning board, if everyone's okay with the reports and the end of the situation, will present their report to town meeting as well. So we can work that into the planning board's report.
So there may be a separate FinCom report and then a planning board report.
And
is
also
that?
the selectmen's recommendation as well.
And selectmen's recommendation.
So there's a couple. There's a lot of ingredients in the soup.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, John.
Thank you. All right, considering we're going to continue this to the next meeting, and Josh, that's just for the benefit of the public.
Yep.
That's going to be at the senior center.
Yeah,
That one will be at the
that
senior
will be at the
center.
senior center, and I will ensure I have 2 weeks to make sure that that's clear. So yes, and
April 26th.
April 26th. There will be more there will be a couple. There's at least one application, special permit for 67 Maple Street. There might be another administrative matter involving the Beaverbrook subdivision. So there will be a couple more items than just tonight. But we obviously hope everyone interested in this topic tonight continues the conversation on the 26th.
Right, there was going to also be the board reorganization should be on the agenda.
Okay. Yep.
Right. Questions? Any other comments from board members? Any other matters that we want to discuss tonight? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
By Lou, is there a second?
Second.
Second?
Second by Peg. Roll call. Tori,
Yes.
Lou,
Yes.
Peg,
Yes,
Jean? I'm in favor as well.